and settle in, letting the sounds of your day simply fade away. Allow your mind to quiet itself and your body to grow heavy, comfortable, and still. We are about to begin a journey together, a slow and peaceful drift into the past, into a story held by the endless, breathing expanse of the ocean. There is nothing for you to do now, but to listen, to relax, and to let the current of this story carry you gently toward a deep and restful sleep. Imagine, if you will, the great Atlantic, not as a place of turmoil or of storm, but as a vast, tranquil surface of deepest blue, stretching out beyond all horizons. It is a world of profound silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind across the water and the long, slow, rhythmic sigh of the waves, rising and falling, rising and falling. This ocean has held the secrets of ages, its depths cradling the quiet mysteries of time itself, and tonight it shares one of its most enduring whispers with us. Our story unfolds in the late months of 1872, a time when the world was stitched together by the steady patience of wind and sail. It was an era of transition, a quiet twilight for the great sailing ships as the age of steam began to dawn. But out on the open water, time moved at an older pace. A ship could sail for weeks, even months, in perfect, unbroken solitude. A tiny, self-contained world of wood and canvas, adrift in the immense silent theatre of the sea and sky. There were no radios to call for help, no satellites to mark a vessel's place in the world. There was only the sun, the stars, and the ancient, unchanging wisdom of the tides. It is in this profound isolation, this deep and boundless peace, that our narrative finds its anchor. Let your mind drift now across that calm and empty ocean until you begin to see something in the distance, a shape against the pale afternoon light. It is a ship, a two-masted vessel known as a brigantine, moving with a strange and aimless grace. Its sails are set, catching the gentle breeze, yet they seem untended. Some are slightly torn, fluttering with a soft, persistent whisper. The ship glides through the water with an eerie stillness, following the whims of the current rather than the command of a steady hand. There is no sign of life on its decks, no sailor at the helm, no lookout in the crow's nest. Only a profound and penetrating silence. It is a vessel sailing on its own, a silent wanderer on a silent sea, a ship that has become little more than a ghost of itself. This lonely, drifting vessel was the American merchant ship, the Mary Celeste. The name itself seems to carry a certain softness, a celestial quietness, as if it were always meant for a story told in hushed tones. When she was discovered on that calm December day, she presented not a scene of horror, but a scene of profound and unsettling mystery. She was not a wreck. She was, in fact, perfectly seaworthy, her hull sound, her structure intact. The ship was not in distress. It was simply empty. The mystery of the Mary Celeste is not a tale of violent storms or sudden catastrophe. It is a quieter, more perplexing riddle, a question whispered by the ocean breeze that has never, ever received a clear reply. Imagine the crew of the ship that found her, the Dei Gratia, Dei Gratia, as they drew alongside the silent brigantine. They hailed her, their calls echoing across the water, only to be met with the same deep and unwavering stillness. When they finally boarded her, they stepped into a world that felt as if it had been abandoned only moments before, yet held the stillness of an age. The ship's cargo, over 1,700 barrels of crude alcohol bound for Italy, was almost entirely undisturbed in the hold. The personal belongings of the crew, their clothes and their books and their pipes, were all neatly stowed in their chests. The ship's logbook was found in the mate's cabin, its final entry noting a calm and unremarkable passage, with no hint of danger or alarm. Everything of value was there, save for the ship's chronometer, its sextant, and its single lifeboat, and of course every single soul who had sailed upon her. This is the mystery we are here to explore tonight, not to solve it with jarring facts or startling conclusions, for there are none to be had, but rather to gently immerse ourselves in its atmosphere, to feel the texture of its time, and to understand the world from which this story emerged. Our journey is one of quiet contemplation, a slow-moving exploration of a moment when a ship, its captain, his family and his crew, all sailed together into a perfect and enduring enigma. So let go of the need for answers, release the desire for solutions, and simply allow the story to unfold. Let the gentle rocking of this historical narrative soothe your mind. Let the quiet whisper of the past be your lullaby, as we prepare to weigh anchor and begin our voyage into the deep and tranquil mystery of the Mary Celeste. Before she was a mystery, before she bore the name Mary Celeste, she was a promise, born of timber and toil on the shores of Nova Scotia. Her story begins not in the emptiness of the open ocean, but in the fullness of a forest in the heart of a small shipbuilding community on Spencer's Island. Picture, if you can, this rugged coastline in the year 1861, a place where the dense, green wilderness meets the cold, grey waters of the Bay of Fundy. The air itself, heavy with the scent of freshly cut spruce and pine, seemed to hold the very spirit of the Canadian frontier, a wildness that was being tamed and shaped, board by board, into a vessel destined for the great, open water. It was here, in the hum of the shipyard, amidst the rhythmic fall of the hammer and the gentle rasp of the saw, that her keel was laid down. Her ribs were formed, and her hull began to take shape. A beautiful and sturdy brigantine, crafted by hands that knew the sea intimately. When she was finally ready to meet the water, she was given a name of strength and power. She was christened the Amazon. The name evoked images of fierce warriors and untamed jungles, a name that suggested a vessel of great resilience, capable of mastering the very oceans she was built to sail. Her launch would have been a moment of communal pride, the culmination of months of labor, as she slid gracefully into the bay, her new paint gleaming, her mast pointing proudly toward the sky. Yet, from the very beginning of her life, a subtle and persistent shadow seemed to follow in her wake. It was a quiet kind of misfortune, a series of gentle but unsettling events that began to weave a narrative of bad luck around this strong new ship. It started, as it so often does, with the one who was meant to guide her. Her first captain, Robert McClellan, a man who was part owner of the vessel, was to be her commander. But just 9 days after her registration, before her maiden voyage had even truly commenced, Captain McClellan fell gravely ill. He died quietly, leaving the Amazon without a master before she had even tasted the salt of the deep ocean. It was a somber and unexpected beginning, a first chapter in the ship's log that was written in loss. Another captain was soon found, and the Amazon began her career at sea, plying the trade routes between North America and Europe. But the shadow lingered. On her maiden voyage, she suffered damage in a storm, a common enough occurrence for any ship. Yet for the Amazon, it felt like a continuation of a story already begun. Not long after, while navigating the narrow confines of the English Channel, she collided with a fishing vessel in the dense fog. A slow, grinding impact in the grey mists that sent the other boat to the bottom, though thankfully its crew was saved. These incidents, when viewed in isolation, were simply the ordinary perils of a life at sea. But as they began to accumulate, a reputation started to form around the Amazon. She was a ship that seemed to attract trouble, not the dramatic, destructive wrath of a hurricane, but a more insidious, chronic unluckiness. After her collision in the Channel, she was sailed back to port for repairs, only to have a fire break out in the shipyard where she was being mended. The flames licked at her wooden hull, scarring the very timbers that were meant to be healed. Again and again, the ship found herself in difficult circumstances, running aground, suffering through difficult passages, and changing ownership several times as her investors grew weary of the constant setbacks and financial losses. Each incident added another layer to her legend, another whisper in the taverns and shipyards of the Atlantic coast. After a few troubled years, the ship was sold at a loss, eventually finding her way to a new home port and a new identity. In 1868, she was purchased by Richard W. Haynes, a prominent shipping owner from New York City. The Amazon sailed south, away from the cold waters of her berth and into the bustling, optimistic heart of American maritime commerce. Here, she was to be given a second chance, a fresh start. The American registry required a new name, an opportunity to shed the unlucky reputation of the Amazon and to sail under a new banner of hope. She underwent significant repairs. Her timbers were strengthened, her appearance altered, and she was rechristened with a name that would, unknowingly, seal her place in history forever. She was no longer the Amazon. She was now the Mary Celeste. A new name, a new coat of paint, a new flag flying from her mast. But a ship, like a person, carries its history within its very bones, and the quiet, somber story of the Amazon was now simply the silent prologue to the enduring mystery that was to come. A ship, for all its strength of timber and iron, is merely an empty vessel until it is filled with the hopes and lives of those who sail it. The story of the Mary Celeste is not just about a ship, but about the people who made it their home, their fleeting, transient world upon the waves. At the heart of this human story was her captain, Benjamin Briggs. He was a man of the sea, born and raised in Wareham, Massachusetts, one of 5 sons in a family whose very soul was tied to the maritime world. He was not just a captain by profession, he was a captain by temperament, a devout Christian, a teetotaler, a man known for his calm demeanor, his fairness, and his profound sense of responsibility. By 1872, he was a seasoned mariner, respected by his peers and trusted by his employers, having commanded several ships and sailed across the world's oceans with quiet confidence and skill. Captain Briggs was more than just an employee. He was a part owner of the Mary Celeste, having invested his own savings into the vessel. This voyage was not merely another job for him. It was a personal venture, a fulfillment of a lifelong dream to command his own ship, a ship that represented his family's future security and success. And so, this journey was destined to be a family affair. Accompanying him was his beloved wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, a strong and capable woman who was herself the daughter of a clergyman. She was no stranger to life at sea, having sailed with her husband on previous voyages. For this trip to Genoa, Italy, she had even brought her own portable sewing machine and a small melodeon, a type of reed organ, intending to fill their small cabin with the comforting sounds and routines of domestic life, creating a pocket of home amidst the vastness of the ocean. Their shared world on the Mary Celeste was made all the more complete by the presence of their youngest child, their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia Matilda Briggs. One can easily imagine the little girl, a cherished and vibrant presence on the quiet decks of the ship, her laughter perhaps mingling with the sound of the wind in the rigging. Their older son, Arthur, was left behind to attend school, a common and practical arrangement for seafaring families of the time. But for Captain Briggs, his wife, and their little daughter. This voyage was to be a shared adventure, a chance to be together, united as a family within the close-knit world of their floating home. The very heart of the ship, the captain's cabin, was not just a place of navigation and command. It was a nursery, a living room, a space filled with a quiet, domestic love. To man the ship, Captain Briggs assembled a small but competent crew of 7 men, each chosen for his skill and sober character. His first mate was Albert G. Richardson, a man who also hailed from Massachusetts and was a close friend of the captain. Richardson was married and looking forward to settling down, having recently used his savings to purchase a home. He served as the captain's right hand, a reliable and experienced officer who would have overseen the day-to-day operations of the ship. The second mate was Andrew Gilling, a young man in his mid-20s, born in New York. And the steward and cook was a man named Edward William Head, who also had a new wife waiting for him back on shore. These were the officers and stewards, the men who would have shared the relative comfort of the aft cabins, close to the captain and his family. The rest of the crew, the hands who would have worked the sails and kept the ship in order, were all German sailors from the Frisian Islands, a region known for producing some of the most skilled and disciplined mariners in the world. Their names were Volkert and Bos Lorenzen, 2 brothers, Arian Martens and Gottlieb Gudschard. They were described as peaceful, reliable seamen, men who spoke little English, but were fluent in the universal language of the sea. It was, by all accounts, a good crew, sober, experienced, and trustworthy. There was no hint of discord, no undercurrent of mutinous intent. On the contrary, the Mary Celeste was set to sail with a crew that Captain Briggs himself had carefully selected, a group of men he believed would ensure a safe and uneventful passage. Thus, as the ship prepared to leave New York in the autumn of 1872, the atmosphere was one of quiet optimism and serene purpose. A respected captain, his loving family, and a hand-picked professional crew, all embarked on a voyage that promised little more than routine work and the simple beauty of a long ocean passage. They were not adventurers seeking fortune, nor were they outcasts fleeing their pasts. They were ordinary people, with ordinary hopes and dreams, bound together for a few short months by the wooden walls of their ship. It is this very ordinariness, this gentle domestic tranquility, that makes their story so profoundly haunting. They were simply a family and a crew who set sail one autumn day and sailed directly into the heart of an eternal whisper. The city of New York, in the cool, crisp air of early November, was a place of constant motion, a sprawling harbor where the forests of masts and the plumes of steam from newer vessels mingled in a restless dance of commerce and departure. On the morning of November 7th, in the year 1872, the brigantine Mary Celeste made her final preparations, resting calmly at her pier on the East River. There was no grand ceremony to mark her leaving, no cheering crowds to wish her farewell. Her departure was a simple, everyday event, one of hundreds that took place in that great port. As the lines were cast off, and she was guided gently into the current, she began her slow, steady journey out toward the vast and waiting Atlantic, leaving the familiar silhouette of the city to fade into the grey autumnal haze behind her. Below her decks, nestled securely in the dark, cool hold, lay her purpose for this voyage. She carried a cargo of 1,701 barrels of crude, denatured alcohol. This was not a substance for human consumption. It was a raw, industrial spirit, destined for the city of Genoa in Italy, where it would be used to fortify wines, a common practice of the era. Each barrel was a vessel in itself, a stout wooden container of oak, sealed to withstand the pressures and the constant, gentle rocking of a long ocean journey. The cargo represented a significant value, a quiet promise of profit upon safe arrival, and it rested in the belly of the ship, a potent and unseen passenger on the voyage to come, a silent, sleeping presence beneath the feet of the crew. The first week of the voyage was challenging, as the North Atlantic in late autumn often is. The weather was heavy, with strong winds and rough seas that would have tested the resolve of both the ship and her crew. The Mary Celeste, with her new captain and recent repairs, met the challenge, her timbers groaning, her sails reefed against the gales as she fought her way eastward. This was the expected trial of any crossing, a period of adjustment where the crew would find their sea legs and settle into the demanding but familiar rhythm of life at sea. The ship would have felt like a living thing, wrestling with the elements, until, as the days wore on, the weather began to break. The turbulent grey seas slowly gave way to the deep, rolling blue of the open ocean, and a sense of calm routine began to settle over the vessel. Life aboard the Mary Celeste would have unfolded with the predictable tranquility of a long and uneventful passage. The days were marked by the changing of the watch, the methodical work of maintaining the sails and the rigging, and the steady guiding hand of Captain Briggs, navigating by the sun and the stars. We can imagine the quiet domesticity he and his wife Sarah created in their cabin. The soft notes from her melodeon perhaps drifting up to the deck, a gentle melody mingling with the whisper of the wind. The ship's official story during this time was recorded day by day upon the pages of the ship's log. It was a document of routine, its entries penned in a clear, professional hand, speaking not of drama or excitement, but of the simple facts of the voyage, notations of wind direction, calculations of speed and position, and brief comments on the weather. It was the steady, reassuring heartbeat of a well-run ship. The final entry in that logbook was made on the morning of Monday, November 25th. It noted the ship's position at 8 o'clock in the morning, placing the Mary Celeste approximately 6 nautical miles from the eastern tip of Santa Maria Island in the Azores. The entry was mundane, its tone completely untroubled. It simply stated the ship's location, with no mention of any difficulty, no hint of an approaching storm, and no expression of any concern whatsoever. And then, the record simply stops. The narrative of the voyage, so carefully chronicled, comes to an abrupt and silent end. The page was not torn, the ink was not smeared. The story was merely paused, as if the writer had set down his pen, with every intention of returning to complete the day's account. For 9 days following that last placid entry, the Mary Celeste sailed on, but her logbook remained silent. She drifted through the water, a ship with a story that was no longer being written, moving east on the currents of the ocean, guided only by the wind in her untended sails. A profound and unbroken silence had fallen over her decks, a quietness that replaced the steady rhythm of the crew and the gentle sounds of the captain's family. The ship had crossed an invisible line, passing from the world of documented reality into the timeless, ethereal realm of mystery. She was no longer just a vessel of commerce. She had begun her transformation into a whisper, a legend, a true ghost upon the water. Our story now shifts its focus to another vessel, a British brigantine named the Dei Gratia, Dei Gratia, which means by the grace of God. Like the Mary Celeste, she was a workhorse of the sea, sailing a similar path across the Atlantic, bound for Gibraltar with a cargo of petroleum. Her captain, David Morehouse, was an experienced and respected Nova Scotian mariner, a man who, by a strange twist of fate, knew Captain Benjamin Briggs and had even shared dinner with him in New York just before their respective voyages began. For weeks, the Dei Gratia had made her own steady progress, her crew accustomed to the vast, empty loneliness of the ocean, a world where another sail on the horizon was a rare and notable event. It was on the afternoon of December 5th, 1872, in the midway point between the Azores and the coast of Portugal, that a lookout aboard the Dei Gratia spotted something unusual. It was a ship, another two-masted brigantine, moving sluggishly and strangely in the distance. To the trained eye of a sailor, her movements were all wrong. She was yawing in the light wind, her sails improperly set for the course she was on, some of them torn and flapping listlessly. She seemed to be drifting more than sailing, a vessel without purpose or direction. As the Dei Gratia drew closer, a feeling of quiet unease began to settle upon Captain Morehouse and his crew. The ship ahead of them was moving like a wounded animal, a silent, aimless wanderer on the calm sea. Captain Morehouse altered his course to close the distance, a common maritime courtesy to offer aid if a vessel was in distress. Through his spyglass, he could now make out the name on her hull, Mary Celeste. A jolt of recognition and concern would have passed through him. This was the ship of his friend, Benjamin Briggs, a vessel that should have been well ahead of him on its journey to Italy. He hailed the ship, his voice carrying across the water, expecting a response, a sign of life from the deck. But his call was met only with a profound and unnerving silence. He hailed her again, and then again, each call echoing back unanswered, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the ocean. The only sound from the Mary Celeste was the soft, rhythmic creak of her timbers and the gentle sigh of the wind through her tattered sails. The ship appeared to be completely deserted. There was no one at the wheel, no watchman on the deck, no sign of any human presence at all. A deep sense of foreboding now permeated the air. This was not a ship in distress in the usual sense. It was something far stranger, far more chilling. Captain Morehouse ordered his first mate, Oliver Devoe, to take a few men and row across in a small boat to investigate. Imagine that short journey across the quiet, slate-grey water, the rhythmic splash of the oars, the only sound as the sailors approached the silent, drifting hull. The Mary Celeste loomed larger and larger, a ghost ship in the pale afternoon light, her stillness feeling both profound and unnatural. As First Mate Devoe and his men pulled alongside and climbed aboard, they stepped into a world of eerie, suspended animation. The deck was wet, as if it had been washed over by recent waves, but it was otherwise orderly. The ship's single lifeboat, a small yawl that should have been secured on the main hatch, was gone. This was a significant and alarming discovery, suggesting a deliberate abandonment of the vessel. Yet, the scene around them was one of perplexing calm. The sails were in disarray, but the rigging was sound. The hatches were open, but the cargo below was untouched. They moved across the silent deck, their footsteps echoing in the stillness, their voices hushed as they called out, "Is anyone aboard?" Their questions met with no reply but the groan of the ship's timbers. The Mary Celeste was adrift, but she was not wrecked. She was abandoned, but she was not ransacked. She was a ship held perfectly in a moment between life and legend, a vessel whose crew had vanished into the thin sea salt air, leaving behind only the quiet, unsettling mystery of their absolute and total disappearance. As the sailors from the Dei Gratia began their slow, methodical search of the silent Mary Celeste, they moved as if through a waking dream, their senses enveloped by a scene of profound and baffling contradiction. On the deck, the disarray of the sails had suggested a struggle against a storm, or perhaps the chaos of a crew in panic. Yet below, in the living quarters of the ship, a completely different story began to unfold. It was a story of peace, of order, and of a sudden, incomprehensible departure. The men descended from the pale light of the afternoon into the dim, quiet stillness of the ship's interior, and what they found there would forever etch the Mary Celeste into the annals of the unexplained. They began, in the crew's forecastle, the cramped quarters where the German sailors would have slept, eaten, and found respite from their duties. Here, there was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no evidence of violence or mutiny. The sailors' sea chests were in their places, and inside their belongings were neatly stowed. Their oilskin coats and boots, their pipes and tobacco, all the small personal effects that make up a mariner's life were present and accounted for. It was as if the men had simply finished their watch, tidied their space, and then vanished from the very face of the earth. The entire space was saturated with a heavy, expectant quiet, a room waiting for occupants who would never, ever return. Moving aft, toward the officers' cabins, this eerie sense of orderly abandonment only deepened. In the first mate's room, the ship's logbook lay open on his desk. Its final entry for November 25th, a testament to a voyage proceeding with unremarkable calm. Beside it, on a slate, were calculations of the ship's position, the last mundane task of a professional navigator. There was nothing to suggest alarm. No frantic, half-finished sentences, no ink blots from a trembling hand. The story simply stopped, mid-thought, on a perfectly ordinary morning. The ship's papers and navigation charts were tidy, except for one crucial absence. The ship's chronometer, a vital and expensive instrument for determining longitude, was gone. So too was the captain's sextant. The tools for knowing where you are in the vast emptiness of the ocean had been deliberately taken. The most poignant discoveries, however, lay within the captain's own cabin, the small domestic world of the Briggs family. Here, the imprint of their lives was so vivid, so present, that the emptiness felt all the more profound. Sarah Briggs's sewing machine sat with a piece of her child's clothing still resting beneath its needle, as if she had been interrupted mid-stitch. Her small melodeon was in its place, a silent instrument that had once filled the cabin with music. Captain Briggs's bed was unmade, not in a state of disarray, but simply as though he had risen from it that morning and had not yet had the chance to tidy it. And everywhere there were the faint, ghostly traces of 2-year-old Sophia, a small indentation on a bunk, perhaps a child's cup left on a table. Signs of a life that was vibrant and cherished, and then, suddenly, was not. Everything of value, money, jewelry, clothing, was untouched. The search party descended further into the dark, cavernous hold of the ship. They found the cargo of industrial alcohol almost entirely intact. Of the more than 1,700 barrels, only 9 were found to be empty. This detail, while curious, only deepened the mystery. Pirates would have surely plundered such a valuable cargo, and a mutinous crew would have likely broached the barrels for drink. But here, the vast majority of the ship's commercial purpose sat undisturbed in the darkness. Furthermore, the ship's stores were plentiful. There was enough food and fresh water on board to last for 6 more months, ruling out any desperate flight from starvation or thirst. The ship herself, upon closer inspection, was found to be in remarkably good condition. She had taken on some water in her hold, but no more than would be expected for a vessel that had been sailing untended for 9 days. Her pumps were in working order. She was not sinking, nor was she in any immediate danger. As the men from the Dei Gratia completed their search and returned to the deck, the full weight of the enigma settled upon them. They had found a sound ship, a valuable cargo, ample provisions, and the personal belongings of a full crew and a family. There were no signs of fire, of struggle, of sickness, or of foul play. The Mary Celeste was not a vessel that had been overcome by disaster. Instead, she felt like a home that had been deliberately, if hastily, evacuated. The only clues to the fate of her 10 souls were the things that were missing: the lifeboat, the chronometer, the sextant, and the people themselves. It was a scene of impeccable, chilling logic. A crew, led by a competent captain, had chosen to leave a perfectly safe and seaworthy vessel, taking their navigational instruments and their only means of escape, to face the vast, unpredictable dangers of the open ocean in a tiny, fragile boat. The question that hung in the silent, salt-laced air was not what disaster had befallen the Mary Celeste, but why. The journey of the Mary Celeste did not end in the open ocean. It simply entered a new and perplexing phase. Guided by a prize crew from the Dei Gratia, the silent brigantine was carefully sailed through the strait that separates Africa from Europe, a passage guarded by the immense, watchful Rock of Gibraltar. Imagine the sight of her arrival, this quiet, unmanned vessel, with her strange and unsettling story, gliding into one of the busiest and most fortified harbours in the world. The port was a cacophony of life, a vibrant tapestry of British naval ships, merchant steamers and fishing boats, all bustling with purpose. And into this world of noise and order came the Mary Celeste, bringing with her a profound and unnerving silence, a mystery that would soon be confined within the rigid, logical framework of a court of law. Once the ship was safely moored, her story was handed over to the authorities, and a formal legal proceeding, known as a vice-admiralty court, was convened. This was not a trial for murder or for a crime, but a salvage hearing, a process designed to determine the amount of reward that should be paid to Captain Morehouse and his crew for rescuing the abandoned vessel and her valuable cargo. It was meant to be a straightforward affair, a matter of assessing value and calculating percentages. But from the very beginning, the proceedings were overshadowed by a deep and pervasive cloud of suspicion, a cloud that emanated from one man in particular. The Attorney General of Gibraltar, a stern and imaginative official named Frederick Solly Flood. Solly Flood was a man of the law, a man who believed that every effect must have a logical, earthly cause, and the story presented to him of a sound ship, abandoned in calm weather for no reason, simply did not fit into his ordered view of the world. He could not accept the idea of a quiet, unexplained disappearance. In his mind, there had to be a darker, more violent explanation, and he became convinced that the crew of the Dei Gratia were not rescuers, but perpetrators. He theorized that they had happened upon the Mary Celeste, murdered Captain Briggs and his crew in a drunken brawl, perhaps with the help of the German sailors, and then concocted the story of the ghost ship in order to claim the salvage money. This dark suspicion became the lens through which every piece of evidence was viewed. The investigation that followed was not so much a search for truth, as it was a search for proof of this theory. Solly Flood ordered a meticulous, inch-by-inch examination of the Mary Celeste, looking for anything that might suggest a violent struggle. His search was not entirely fruitless. He found what he believed to be damning clues. On the deck, he noted several deep cuts in the wooden railing, marks which he declared were made by a hatchet, evidence of a fierce battle. In the captain's cabin, a sword was found resting on a locker, and on its blade, Solly Flood identified reddish-brown stains that he confidently pronounced to be blood. These discoveries were presented to the court as the smoking guns, the undeniable proof of a brutal and bloody mutiny. Yet, as the investigation wore on, these seemingly conclusive pieces of evidence began to dissolve under closer scrutiny. The so-called blood stains on the sword were tested, and it was determined that they were not blood at all, but most likely simple rust, a common affliction for any metal object exposed to the damp, salty air of the sea. The axe marks on the railing, while real, could not be definitively linked to a violent act. They could have been made by a previous crew or for any number of mundane maritime reasons. The 9 empty barrels of alcohol, which Solly Flood saw as proof of a drunken rampage, also presented a problem for his theory. Why would a mutinous crew, having murdered everyone on board, only drink a tiny fraction of the available alcohol, and leave the rest of the valuable cargo untouched. The official narrative began to fray, its logic becoming as tattered as the sails of the Mary Celeste herself. For weeks, the crew of the Dei Gratia were detained in Gibraltar, their integrity questioned, their characters scrutinized. They gave their testimony with clarity and consistency, but they could offer no explanation for the mystery, for they knew none. The court was left in a state of deep frustration, caught between the Attorney General's insistence on foul play and the profound lack of any real, tangible evidence to support it. In the end, the court had no choice but to release the Dei Gratia and her crew, but the cloud of suspicion had done its work. The salvage payment awarded to them was unusually small, a fraction of what they should have received, a quiet official reprimand for a crime that they had not committed and for which there was no proof. The formal investigation, with all its legal power and intellectual rigor, had failed. It had taken a deep and wondrous mystery of the sea, and had only managed to make it, humanly and sadly, more complicated. The true story remained where it had always been, out on the silent water. When the human mind is confronted with a void, a perfect vacuum of information, it has a natural and profound tendency to fill that emptiness with stories. And in the late 19th century, as news of the silent, drifting Mary Celeste spread through newspapers and dockside gossip, the stories that first rushed in to fill the vacuum were the oldest and most familiar tales of the sea, tales of violence, greed, and rebellion. Before the ship became a gentle mystery, a quiet enigma to be pondered in tranquil moments, it was first imagined as a stage for the darkest parts of human nature. The public, hungry for an explanation, and the investigators, bound by a need for earthly culprits, turned instinctively to the twin spectres of piracy and mutiny. Let us first consider the pirates, a word that conjures images of swift, black-hulled ships appearing suddenly on the horizon, of grappling hooks thrown across the rails, and of a brutal, chaotic struggle on the decks. The theory was a compelling one, for the seas of 1872 were not yet entirely tame, and the memory of pirates preying on merchant ships was still a vivid part of the collective consciousness. The story was simple. A pirate crew, perhaps from the lawless coasts of North Africa, had overtaken the Mary Celeste, murdered everyone on board to leave no witnesses, and then, for some unknown reason, abandoned the ship. It was a narrative that provided a clear villain, and a tragic, if gruesome, resolution for Captain Briggs, his family, and his crew. But this dramatic and violent story, for all its narrative simplicity, begins to quietly unravel when held against the silent, stubborn facts of the scene itself. The very purpose of piracy is profit. It is a business, however brutal, of theft. Yet the most valuable asset of the Mary Celeste, her 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, was left almost entirely untouched in the hold. Why would pirates risk everything to capture a ship, only to abandon its valuable cargo? The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Furthermore, the personal belongings of the crew and the Briggs family, including money and other items of value, remained secure in their cabins. A pirate crew would have ransacked the ship from stem to stern, tearing it apart in their search for plunder. Yet the boarding party from the Dei Gratia found a scene of eerie order, not one of chaotic looting. And perhaps most tellingly of all, the ship itself was left perfectly seaworthy. A pirate crew, having committed such a terrible act, would have almost certainly scuttled the vessel, opening her seacocks and sending her to the bottom, to erase all evidence of their crime. To leave the Mary Celeste afloat, a pristine and drifting testament to their presence, makes no logical sense. The theory of piracy, so vivid in the imagination, simply dissolves when faced with the quiet reality of the ship's condition. If not pirates from without, then perhaps the danger came from within. This was the theory of mutiny, the dark suspicion championed by the Attorney General in Gibraltar. This narrative painted a picture of a crew turning against its captain. Perhaps, the theory went, the German sailors, tempted by the alcohol in the hold, had broken into the cargo, and in a drunken rage they had murdered the sober Captain Briggs, his first mate, and his family. In this version of the story, the supposed axe marks on the rail and the rust on the captain's sword were held up as proof of a desperate, violent confrontation on the high seas. It was a story of discipline breaking down, of authority overthrown, of the fragile social order of a ship collapsing into anarchy. Yet this theory, too, crumbles under the gentle weight of the evidence. The crew, hand-picked by Captain Briggs, were known to be professional and peaceful sailors, men from a culture renowned for its maritime discipline. Captain Briggs himself was a respected and fair commander, not the kind of tyrant who would inspire a bloody rebellion. And again, there is the silent testimony of the cargo. The fact that only 9 of the 1,700 barrels were empty argues against a widespread, drunken rampage. But the most powerful argument against mutiny is the serene domestic scene found in the captain's cabin, and the very presence of Sarah Briggs and her little daughter Sophia. It requires an almost unimaginable leap of darkness to believe that this professional crew would brutally murder not only their captain, but also his wife and their 2-year-old child, and then leave behind no trace of such a horrific struggle. And finally, the ultimate question remains. If the crew did mutiny and seize control of the ship, why would they then abandon it? To take the small, fragile lifeboat and venture into the vast emptiness of the Atlantic, leaving behind a perfectly good ship and its valuable cargo, is not the act of a victorious, mutinous crew. It is the act of people fleeing from something they perceive to be a greater danger than the open ocean itself. And so the theories of human violence, of pirates and mutineers, as compelling as they are, feel like stories imposed upon the mystery, rather than answers arising from it. The truth, it seems, was something quieter, something stranger, and something that belonged not to the world of human conflict, but to the deep, silent, and powerful world of the sea itself. Sometimes, when the thread of history grows thin, when the facts become faint whispers that offer no comfort and no conclusion, the voice of fiction rises to fill the silence. It weaves a narrative that is bolder, more complete, and often more satisfying than the fragmented truth. And so it was with the Mary Celeste. A dozen years after her discovery, when the official investigation had faded into memory, and the mystery had settled into a quiet, unsolved riddle, a powerful new story emerged, one that would capture the public's imagination so completely that it would become forever entangled with the real history of the ship. It was a story born not in the salty air of a ship's deck, but in the quiet, lamplit study of a young doctor and aspiring author. A man whose name would one day become synonymous with mystery, but who was then just beginning to explore the shadowy landscapes of the human imagination. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In 1884, Doyle published a fictional story in the popular Cornhill magazine titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. It was presented as the first-hand account of a supposed survivor, a literary device that gave it a powerful and deceptive air of authenticity. In Doyle's telling, the ship was called the Marie Celeste, a subtle change, but one that would stick in the public mind, and the voyage was far from ordinary. The story's narrator, Jeffson, is a sickly American veteran who joins the ship's passage for his health. He describes a vessel carrying not only Captain Briggs and his crew, but also several passengers, including a mysterious and charismatic man of mixed race named Septimius Goring and his associates. This fictional character, Goring, is the dark heart of Doyle's tale. He is portrayed as a man of immense intelligence and magnetism, but one who is consumed by a deep and venomous hatred for the white race, a hatred born from the unspeakable atrocities committed against his family under the institution of American slavery. He is not a common pirate seeking treasure. He is a zealot, a vengeful executioner on a grim and terrible mission. Doyle's story unfolds with a slow, creeping dread, as Goring and his accomplices, one by one, systematically and stealthily, murder the entire crew. Their methods are brutal and cunning, leaving little trace of their actions. The captain is killed. The sailors vanish over the side in the dead of night, until only the narrator Jeffson remains. The motive, in this fictional account, was not plunder. It was racial vengeance. Goring's plan was to seize the ship, sail it to the coast of Africa, and there, using the wealth he had accumulated, establish a new society free from the white man's influence. It was a grand and terrible vision, and the Marie Celeste was merely the vehicle for his righteous and bloody crusade. The only reason the narrator Jeffson is spared is because he happens to possess a magical African charm, an artifact that Goring believes holds a powerful spiritual protection, making Jeffson untouchable. And so, instead of being killed, Jeffson is put ashore on the African coast, left to watch as the Marie Celeste, now a vessel of vengeance, sails away with its new masters, disappearing over the horizon, never to be seen again. This story was a sensation. Published anonymously at first, its gripping narrative and confident, testimonial style led many readers to believe it was a genuine account, the long-awaited solution to the famous maritime mystery. The fiction was so powerful that it began to overwrite the facts in the public imagination. The name Marie Celeste started to replace the true name, Mary Celeste. The idea of a passenger on board, a notion with no historical basis, became a common feature in retellings of the event. Doyle had created a compelling plot, with a charismatic villain, a clear motive, and a dramatic conclusion, and in doing so, he gave the public something the real mystery never could: an answer. It was a brilliant piece of fiction, but it was a fiction that would cast a long and confusing shadow over the historical record. There was no passenger named Septimius Goring. There was no survivor named J. Habakkuk Jeffson. There was no conspiracy of racial revenge. The real ship had been carrying alcohol to Italy, not passengers to Africa. Yet Doyle's story was so masterfully told that it has become an inseparable part of the legend. And so, a work of pure imagination became forever woven into the fabric of a true event, a brilliant, fictional thread that adds its own dark color to the tapestry of the mystery, making it richer, more complex, and even harder to unravel. Let us now drift away from the compelling, shadowed lanes of fiction and return to the quiet, open waters of the mystery itself. Let us leave behind the spectres of pirates and mutineers and the vivid phantoms born from a novelist's imagination, and turn our attention to the most tangible clue of all, the one that is defined not by its presence, but by its profound and complete absence. The key to understanding the final silent moments aboard the Mary Celeste does not lie in what was found on the ship, but in what was missing. The single solitary lifeboat, the ship's small yawl, was gone. And in that simple, undeniable fact, we find the anchor for the most plausible, the most logical, and the most deeply human and heartbreaking of all the theories. This theory does not begin with an act of violence or a descent into madness, but with an act of profound caution. It begins with a responsible and experienced captain, Benjamin Briggs, facing a moment of uncertainty and making a calculated decision to protect his crew and his family. The evidence suggests that the abandonment of the Mary Celeste was not a frantic, permanent flight, but was intended to be a temporary evacuation, a strategic retreat to a safe distance from which they could observe their ship and assess a perceived danger. All 10 souls, the captain, his wife and child, and the 7-man crew, would have calmly and deliberately lowered the lifeboat into the water. They would have taken with them the essential tools of navigation, the chronometer and the sextant. For if they were separated from their vessel, these would be their only hope, and they would have gathered together in that small, fragile boat, a tiny, self-contained world of 10 people, floating on the surface of the vast and empty ocean. What could have prompted such a cautious but drastic measure? We cannot know for certain, but we can imagine the scenarios, grounded in the realities of the sea. Perhaps it was a fear of the cargo itself. The ship had sailed through rough weather and then into calmer seas. This change in conditions could have caused some of the 1,700 barrels of crude alcohol to leak, releasing a volatile, invisible vapor into the confined space of the hold. Captain Briggs may have opened the hatches to ventilate the ship and been met with a pungent, alarming smell. Fearing a sudden catastrophic explosion, a single spark was all it would take. His most prudent course of action would be to get everyone off the ship, to wait at a safe distance until the dangerous fumes had cleared. Or perhaps the fear was of the ocean itself. While the ship's log speaks of calm on November 25th, the tattered sails tell a different story, of heavy weather at some point after that last entry was made. It is possible the Mary Celeste was struck by a sudden violent squall, or even a waterspout, a tornado at sea. Such an event could have caused the ship to take on a significant amount of water in a very short time. The ship's pumps were found to be in working order, but perhaps in the chaos of the moment, Captain Briggs believed the ship was foundering, sinking beneath their feet. In this scenario, too, the only responsible choice would be to move everyone to the relative safety of the lifeboat, to stand off from the ship and determine if she was, in fact, lost. And so we can picture the scene. The 10 souls in the small lifeboat, floating on the gentle swells of the Atlantic, watching the mothership. A long rope, perhaps the main peak halyard, over 300 feet in length, would have connected them to the Mary Celeste, acting as a lifeline, a tether back to their home and their safety. They were not yet lost. They were merely waiting. And it is here, in this moment of watchful quiet, that the tragedy unfolds. Perhaps the wind, which had been calm, suddenly freshened, filling the large, untended sails of the Mary Celeste. The ship, a much larger and more powerful vessel than the tiny lifeboat, would have begun to move, pulling away, putting an immense and sudden strain on the connecting rope. Or perhaps the very storm that had prompted the evacuation in the first place returned with a final furious gust. In that single terrible moment, the lifeline parted. The rope either snapped under the sudden shearing force, or perhaps it had to be cut to prevent the small lifeboat from being swamped and pulled under by the larger vessel. And then there was only the heartbreaking sight of the Mary Celeste, their home, their world, their only source of food and water and shelter, sailing away from them. She would have moved with an eerie, steady purpose, her sails catching the breeze, carrying her inexorably toward the horizon. The 10 people in the lifeboat could only watch, their shouts unheard, their frantic rowing no match for the speed of a brigantine under sail. They would have watched as their ship became smaller and smaller, a tiny speck in the distance, until it vanished completely, leaving them utterly and completely alone. Adrift in a tiny, overloaded boat, with no provisions, and only the indifferent sky above and the endless rolling ocean below. Their fate was sealed. It would have been a quiet and desolate end, a slow fading away, a tragic final chapter written on the surface of the water and then washed away forever. This theory, more than any other, honors the character of Captain Briggs and his crew. It requires no villain, no monster, no madness. Only a cautious man, a sudden turn of fate, and the vast, unforgiving power of the sea. To truly understand what might have happened on the quiet decks of the Mary Celeste, we must go deeper than the surface of the ocean, deeper even than the ship's hold, and into the very molecular nature of her cargo. Let us revisit those 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol resting in the cool darkness below. For decades, their presence was a point of confusion in the mystery, a valuable asset left untouched, an argument against piracy or mutiny. But as our understanding of science has grown, we have come to see that the cargo itself may not have been the prize. It may have been the threat. A leading and compelling modern theory finds its roots not in human drama, but in the simple, immutable laws of chemistry and physics. The key to this theory lies in those 9 specific barrels that were found empty. For a long time it was assumed they had leaked, a common enough occurrence. But recent scholarship has revealed a crucial detail about their construction. Unlike the other 1,700 barrels, which were made from sturdy, resilient white oak, these 9 barrels were made of red oak. This may seem like a trivial distinction, but to a cooper or a chemist, it is a world of difference. Red oak is a much more porous wood, its internal structure more like a collection of tiny connected straws, making it far less suitable for containing a volatile liquid like alcohol. It is highly probable, almost certain, that over the course of the voyage, these 9 barrels did not just leak liquid, but allowed alcohol vapor to escape, to seep out, and slowly, silently fill the confined, unventilated space of the ship's hold. Imagine now the moment of discovery. It is a calm day at sea, sometime after November 25th. Captain Briggs, a meticulous and prudent commander, perhaps decides it is time to inspect his cargo. He orders the main hatch to be opened. As the heavy wooden cover is lifted away, a sudden and powerful wave of alcohol fumes, which has been building in pressure for weeks, erupts from the hold. It would have been an astonishing and deeply alarming event, not a silent, gentle odor, but a forceful, explosive-like outgassing of vapor, accompanied by a loud, rumbling sound. To the crew on deck, it would have seemed as if the very soul of the ship had just let out a monstrous and fiery breath. In that moment, Captain Briggs would have been faced with a terrifying and immediate possibility, a catastrophic explosion. He would have known that the hold of his ship was now filled with a highly flammable, invisible cloud. A single spark, from the galley stove, from a sailor's metal tool striking the deck, from a flash of static electricity, could ignite the vapor and blow the ship and everyone on it to pieces. He was, in effect, standing on a floating bomb. There would have been no time for debate, no time for careful consideration. The overwhelming, instinctual, and correct response would have been to get everyone off the ship as quickly and as calmly as possible. This theory aligns perfectly with the strange and specific clues found on the ship. It explains the sudden, orderly abandonment. The crew was not fleeing a human threat. They were fleeing a chemical one. It explains why they would leave a perfectly seaworthy vessel, because they believed it was about to be obliterated. It explains the absence of the lifeboat, the chronometer, and the sextant, all the necessary components of a temporary, precautionary evacuation. Captain Briggs would have ordered his crew to lower the boat, gather the navigational instruments, and row a safe distance away, likely tethered to the main ship, to wait for the dangerous fumes to dissipate in the open air. There would have been no panic, no chaos, just the swift, professional execution of an emergency procedure. And this theory also explains the condition of the ship when it was found 9 days later by the Dei Gratia. After the initial outgassing of fumes, the ship would have returned to a state of perfect, harmless equilibrium. The vapor would have cleared, the danger would have passed, leaving behind no scorch marks, no evidence of fire, no sign of the perceived threat that had prompted the evacuation. The ship was not damaged because the explosion they feared never happened. The Mary Celeste was left in a pristine state, a silent testament to a moment of extreme but unrealized peril. The theory of the alcohol fumes provides a complete and elegant solution, one that accounts for every strange detail of the scene. It paints a picture not of violence or supernatural intervention, but of a responsible captain making a logical choice in the face of an alarming but ultimately phantom danger. And it leads us once again to that same heartbreaking conclusion. 10 people in a small boat, watching their home, their only hope, drift away from them on the silent, indifferent tide. There are forces in the natural world that move with a power so immense, so utterly indifferent to human endeavor, that they seem to belong to an older, more elemental planet. The ocean, in its seemingly endless tranquility, can give birth to such forces in a matter of moments. Let your mind now picture one of the sea's most strange and beautiful spectacles. A waterspout. Imagine a patch of the calm ocean surface beginning to stir, as if touched by an unseen hand. A column of air begins to whirl, drawing a fine mist of seawater upward, creating a graceful spinning pillar that connects the surface of the ocean to the dark belly of a cloud above. It is a tornado at sea, a brief, intense, and profoundly dramatic display of nature's raw and untamed energy. It is a vision of both terror and beauty, a fleeting dance between water and sky. The region where the Mary Celeste was sailing in late November is known for its sudden and unpredictable squalls, the very kind of weather that can spawn these maritime whirlwinds. The ship had already endured a week of heavy storms, and the atmosphere would have remained unstable, capable of producing sudden, localized violence even on a day that seemed otherwise calm. Picture the scene aboard the ship, the air growing strangely still and heavy, the light taking on a peculiar greenish tint. A dark, menacing cloud would have gathered with astonishing speed, its base seeming to reach down toward the water. A low, humming roar would have begun to fill the air, a sound unlike the familiar howl of the wind, a sound of immense and concentrated power approaching with terrifying speed. The encounter, when it came, would have been swift, chaotic, and overwhelming. The waterspout would have descended upon the ship, not with the force to shatter her hull, but with a drenching, disorienting violence. A torrential downpour of seawater and rain, sucked up from the ocean's surface, would have cascaded across the decks, flooding them in an instant. The wind, whirling at incredible speeds, would have violently shaken the ship, tearing at the sails and rigging, ripping the canvas with a sound like cannon fire. For a few terrifying moments, the world of the Mary Celeste would have been a vortex of roaring wind and blinding spray, a world of pure elemental chaos. And then, just as quickly as it arrived, the waterspout would have passed, moving on across the water, its roar fading into the distance, leaving behind a stunned and dripping silence. In the immediate aftermath, Captain Briggs and his crew would have found themselves on a ship that felt mortally wounded. The decks would be awash with water, sloshing with every roll of the vessel. The sails, their primary means of control, would be in tatters. But the most alarming discovery would have come when they checked the ship's pumps and sounded the well to measure the amount of water in the hold. A waterspout can drop a tremendous volume of water onto a ship in a very short time, and it is entirely possible that this deluge, combined with the violent motion, would have given a false reading, suggesting the hull had been breached and the ship was taking on water at an alarming rate. In that moment of post-traumatic confusion, with the memory of the terrifying roar still echoing in his ears, Captain Briggs would have had every reason to believe his ship was sinking beneath him. Faced with what he perceived to be a sinking ship, the captain's course of action would have been immediate, logical, and born of his ultimate duty to preserve the lives of his family and crew. He would have given the order to abandon ship. It would have been, once again, an orderly but urgent evacuation. The lifeboat would be lowered, the 10 souls would climb aboard, and they would take with them the navigational instruments, their only hope should they become separated from their vessel. They would have pushed off from the Mary Celeste, intending to remain at a safe distance, to watch and wait, to see if their beloved ship would indeed founder and slip beneath the waves. They were not fleeing in panic, but making a tactical retreat from a vessel they believed was doomed. And here, once again, we arrive at that same heart-breaking tableau. The crew, afloat in their small boat, watching their ship. But the ship does not sink. The pumps, once cleared of any debris, would have worked perfectly. The water in the hold was not from a breach, but from the deluge that had poured over the decks. The Mary Celeste was wounded, but she was not dying. She was, in fact, still a sound and seaworthy vessel. But as she bobbed on the waves, a remnant of the squall, a sudden and powerful gust of wind, would have filled her tattered sails. The tether connecting her to the lifeboat would have snapped under the strain, and the ship, their only sanctuary, would have begun to sail away. The very event that caused them to leave the ship was also the thing that sealed their fate, creating a brief, terrifying illusion of disaster that led to a real and permanent one. It was a tragic miscalculation, a fatal misunderstanding between man and the sea, born from the awesome and deceptive power of the ocean itself. The story of a ship does not end when its most famous chapter is written. After the court in Gibraltar finally released her, the Mary Celeste was sailed back to her home port of New York, a vessel now forever draped in a shroud of mystery and quiet tragedy. She was a celebrity of the sea, a ship whose name was whispered in every port, a floating embodiment of the ocean's deepest secrets. Yet for all her fame, she was still just a ship, a thing of wood and iron and canvas, and she still had a working life to live. Her owners, hoping to recoup their losses, repaired her and put her back into service. But the shadow that had clung to her since her first days, as the Amazon seemed to have deepened, her reputation for misfortune now cemented by the impossible and eternal question of her vanished crew. For the next 12 years, the Mary Celeste became a wandering pariah of the seas. She was sold and resold, changing hands 17 times, passing from one owner to another in a long chain of financial loss and disappointment. No one seemed to be able to make a success of her. It was as if the notoriety that made her famous also made her an unwelcome presence in any fleet. Captains were wary of her. Sailors were reluctant to sign on for a voyage aboard a vessel with such a somber and unsettling history. The story followed her everywhere she went, a constant invisible companion. She sailed on, carrying mundane cargoes of lumber and fish and cotton, her days of carrying precious spirits to Italy long behind her. Her voyages were often unprofitable, her passages plagued by minor mishaps and the constant nagging weight of her own legend. She grew older, her timbers weakening, her sails patched and worn, a slow and steady decline from the proud brigantine she once had been. She became a tramp steamer of the sailing world, taking on the undesirable cargoes and the difficult routes that other, more fortunate ships avoided. The memory of the Briggs family, of little Sophia's presence in the captain's cabin, faded into the deep grain of the wood, replaced by a succession of weary, transient crews who saw her not as a home, but as a hard-luck vessel, a place to earn a difficult wage before moving on. The ship, that had once been the vessel of a respectable family man's dream had become little more than a floating liability, a slow-moving testament to failure and loss. Her final chapter, when it came, was not one of noble struggle or quiet dignity, but a sad and sordid affair, a fittingly ignoble end for a ship that had been trailed by misfortune for her entire life. In 1884 she was purchased by her last captain, a man named Gilman C. Parker. His plan for the ship had nothing to do with honest trade. He loaded the Mary Celeste with a worthless cargo, old rubber boots, cheap cat food, and worn-out odds and ends, but he insured it, and the ship, for a handsome sum, claiming it was a precious and valuable consignment. His intention was simple and deeply cynical: insurance fraud. He would deliberately wreck the ship, destroy her completely, and then collect the insurance money, turning the ship's final voyage into his own personal profit. In early 1885, Captain Parker sailed the Mary Celeste to the Caribbean, to the coast of Haiti. He chose his spot carefully, a large and well-known coral reef called the Rochelet Bank. In broad daylight, on a clear and calm day, he ordered his crew to set all sails, and he steered his ship directly and deliberately onto the reef. With a final shuddering groan, the Mary Celeste ran aground, her hull pierced by the sharp coral, the sea rushing into her old, tired timbers. To ensure her complete destruction, Parker and his men then set her on fire, an act of final, deliberate desecration. They rowed away in the lifeboat, watching as the flames consumed the vessel that had survived so much, the ship that held one of the world's greatest mysteries. But the Mary Celeste, it seemed, had one final stubborn act of defiance left in her. The fire was not as destructive as Parker had hoped, and the ship, though wrecked beyond repair, did not burn to the waterline. She remained, a scarred and broken skeleton on the reef, a visible testament to the crime. When Parker filed his fraudulent insurance claim, the authorities grew suspicious. An investigation revealed the worthless nature of the cargo and the deliberate nature of the wreck. Parker was arrested and tried for fraud. The ship that began her life with the death of her first captain and became a legend through the disappearance of another, ended her days as the central prop in a failed and pathetic crime. Her broken remains were eventually scattered by the sea, her timbers finally returning to the ocean that had defined her long, strange, and melancholy existence. And so, our journey through time comes to its gentle and quiet close. We have sailed the currents of history, from a bustling shipyard in Nova Scotia to the silent, sunlit waters off the coast of the Azores. We have walked the spectral decks of a ship held in a moment of perfect, unexplained stillness. We have listened to the whispers of pirates and mutineers, to the brilliant inventions of a master storyteller, and to the quiet, compelling logic of scientists and historians. We have explored the countless paths that all lead from that one central, unanswerable question: what happened to the 10 souls aboard the Mary Celeste? We have weighed every theory, considered every clue, and now, at the end of our voyage, we are left where we began, in the presence of a deep and profound and unending mystery. The story of the Mary Celeste endures not because it is a riddle to be solved, but because it is a story that reminds us of the vast and powerful quiet that surrounds our busy, noisy world. It is a testament to the fact that not every question has an answer. Not every loose thread can be neatly tied. The ocean, in its immense and patient wisdom, took the truth of that day and folded it into itself, leaving behind only the ghost of a story, a vessel to be filled with our own fears, our own theories, and our own sense of wonder. The silence that fell upon that ship in 1872 has never truly been broken. It echoes down through the decades, a soft but persistent hum beneath the surface of our modern, certain world. Perhaps the crew fell victim to the potent, invisible fumes of their own cargo. A logical, scientific explanation that leads to a deeply human and tragic end. Perhaps they were fleeing a terrifying waterspout, a momentary phantom of a storm that tricked them into abandoning their only sanctuary. These theories feel close to the truth. They honor the character of Captain Briggs and his crew, and they fit the strange, specific collection of facts. They lead us to the same heartbreaking image. 10 people adrift in a tiny boat, watching as their world sails away over the horizon, their hope shrinking with every passing wave, until there is nothing left but the endless, empty ocean. It is an ending without violence, without villains, an ending of profound and terrible misfortune, a quiet tragedy of miscalculation and circumstance. But in the end, we cannot know. The sea holds its secrets well. The story of the Mary Celeste has become a modern myth, a piece of folklore that belongs not to the realm of history books, but to the deeper, more ancient realm of the human imagination. It is a story to be told on a quiet night, a story that invites us not to think, but to wonder, to feel the vastness of the world, and to accept the simple, peaceful beauty of not knowing. The truth of what happened to Captain Briggs, to his wife Sarah, to their little daughter Sophia, and to their 7 trusted crewmen, is a story that now belongs only to them, and to the silent, breathing sea. So let your mind drift now, with that lonely, gentle ship. Let the need for answers fade away, like a distant sail disappearing over the horizon. There is nothing left to solve, nothing left to question. There is only the quiet, rhythmic sigh of the waves, rising and falling, rising and falling. Let the image of that silent, empty vessel guide you now, sailing on, under a canopy of distant, silent stars. A ghost ship on a ghost of a sea, drifting peacefully, eternally, into the deep and restful quiet.